Alrighty guys, so in today's video we're going to be discussing the pros and cons of the 50 Series Oliver. So I'm sure most of you already noted duly the fact that the paint's already halfway incorrect, but we're just going to ignore that for purposes only known to us. With whatever that means, of course. So I guess first and foremost we'll work with our mechanical side of things, and we'll start from the front and work our way to the back just to make it easy on everybody. Alright, so first and foremost is going to be the front end on these machines. You could have gotten these in a narrow front, a wide front, hydraulic assist, or four-wheel drive options. The four-wheel drive and hydraulic assist are hand in hand. They're both front-wheel assists, but one's just a little different powered than the other. But that's a whole nother story for another day. These front ends are pretty damn robust. I've seen a few snap here and there, but it's very rare that you do see them snap. You have to put them through an extreme amount of stress for them to even think about snapping. Like running down a hill in a field and running into a tree, kind of snapping them off deal. But I mean, every now and then you get your average bearing failure, but other than that, they're pretty robust front end. Power steering boxes on these like to leak a little bit. They're pretty tough, but like for example, this one leaks real bad. You can see it's wet in there, and that's where most of our hydraulic fluid's going. It's not spraying out, but the seals in it are definitely shot and they need to be replaced. So that's a pretty weak point on these tractors, whether it be a 1550 through a 2150. If it's two-wheel drive and it has wide front with that similar steering box in it, more than likely it'll need replaced with the seals. So up next is the cooling system, and honestly on these 50 series tractors, I don't think I've seen many that were faulty. Our Detroit tractor back there, our 1950, aka a Mighty Toe 4115, but another story there. It had a radiator issue, or it had a hole punctured in it, but after it's been sitting for 40 years, I'm honestly not surprised at that problem. Other than that, these things are pretty robust and simple. You got a thermostat, cooling hoses, water pump, and radiator. Pretty much the simple gist of it. And I guess next up on the list will be power plants. And of course, this one's kind of controversial considering to the fact that it can range from anything Waukesha all the way up to a Hercules engine. So it's kind of pick your poison and do your research, but I'll give you kind of a general consensus on everybody. Pretty much all the gasser and diesel engines that were Waukesha made were very reliable, very robust, until you get up to about the 283 and 310 direct injection Waukesha diesels. Those two are kind of iffy. If you find the right ones that are well maintained, you're probably going to be all right, especially if it's naturally aspirated with no turbo. You won't have any issues. You can pretty much just run it, not worry about it. But on the other hand, they're pretty well known for chucking holes on this side of the block, actually. And I think numbers 1 and 2 and maybe 6 were the culprit ones, where they'd chuck a rod through the block and then you got a nice inspection window you got to repair. So, yeah, they can be a bit of an issue, but other than that, you get the occasional head gasket problem, and other than that, they're pretty much a really solid, robust engine, just like any other old-school diesel. You move up to the 1850 where you get into the Perkins diesels like this one. I've never had a problem with them. Once again, another robust diesel will give you a good bang for your buck on your work. The only downside to these engines are, once again, typical head gasket problems with a diesel of this age. And then your injection pump and injectors, they can get kind of tired and worn out over time. These especially like to get slop in the timing gears, where it'll start fluttering at a higher RPM, which this one I definitely think suffers from. But I think we got to step up in problems considering to the fact that miss is real bad. I got to miss somewhere. I got to figure that out. And whole nother story there too. But moral of the story is the 6-cylinder Perkins that come in these are pretty much an excellent engine all around, as long as it's been well maintained. The Detroit tractors, you know what? Let's just go back there to that one. This one's kind of a give or take on whether you're going to like it or not. You can't beat them on reliability. That one over there actually is a 1900, and it has 8 or 9,000 hours on the original tack, and it's still kicking. This one only has 800 hours on it because it's an industrial tractor, and then it got parked almost as soon as it was bought. But these have a 453 two-stroke Detroit diesel in them, and the reliability on them, like I've said, is unbeatable. They're pretty much never going to give you problems unless you have some sort of fuel injection problem or air problem. Literally the basics of diesel. If you got an air problem or fuel problem, it's not going to run. These things will damn near run on anything you feed through. You probably could put apple juice in the tank and it'd probably take it and go, yum. The downside to these is purely the loudness. I'm sure a lot of you that have heard them in person or own one know what I'm talking about. And that guy right there, it does not provide anywhere enough sufficient muffling when it comes to the exhaust. This thing is a screamer, hence the name Screamin' Jimmy. These Detroits are loud. They're a great powerhouse, and honestly, they have untapped potential. You can throw a set of a little bit bigger injectors in here and probably knock her up to about 130 horse or 140 horse before you got to start putting a turbocharger on it and changing pistons and whatever else have you to get up to about the 170, 180, 200 mark, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these little guys will keep going. There's about another 20 to 30 horsepower range where you can add a little extra horsepower in there if you so choose to, and the rear ends will definitely take it. PTO might start slipping a little bit if you got a PTO tractor, and your hydraulics, yeah, don't worry about it. It's when you start turning up RPMs when you got to worry about it. These things will actually run up to about 4,300 RPM before you start getting valve flutter, if I remember right. So, like I said, robust engines, good horsepower, but they're obnoxious. Downright obnoxious. So next up is the Hercules diesel in the 2050 and 2150, and those guys are just about the most robust engines you can get for the 50 series. Of course, they're the most expensive as well. Once again, the reliability is unmatched on them. The military used them relentlessly. Always a favorite there. Not too terribly loud. They were known as the Whispering Quiet Diesel. And honestly, the only downside, if I remember correctly, to them is that parts are expensive. They're kind of hard to get parts for. And if they are found, they're not cheap. So next up in the old playbook will be the auxiliary transmission category. And in this case, I got a hydropower. You can have three options with these. You can have a straight shaft from the clutch straight back to the input shaft. You can have a hydropower 2-speed or the hydraul shift 3-speed. Now the hydropower and hydraul shift pretty much use the same principle. They have clutch packs that are hydraulically shifted with the lever and a valve body. They give you, depending on the transmission, a either 20 or 30% over or under in horsepower, torque, and speed. All it does is just change gearing inside there to the input shaft on the transmission. It's pretty simple, honestly. These guys are pretty robust. It's really when you start throwing some really, really high torque at them, like say if you were to want to 5.9 swap this, and by 5.9 I mean the Cummins 12 valve, 24 valve, pick your poison kind of deal. But if I put an engine in here that put out probably 200, 250 horsepower and about 500 foot-pounds of torque or higher, you might see some slipping starting to occur in here. That's when you might want to start modifying the coolant capacity here, because there is a cooler up there, but it's not very big, and those two black hoses right there are for the hydropower and that little cooler right there. They keep the fluid nice and cool in there. And the clutch packs will just start to slip a little bit, but I mean, other than that, they're pretty robust as well. If you keep your horsepower down, you won't really worry about it ever, honestly. They do have the tendency, as with any other transmission that has a clutch in it, they will get worn out. And when you try to go into direct drive or overdrive, depending on the transmission that you have, the clutch packs will sometimes just sit there and slip, and you won't speed up, or you just won't move at all. The list goes on. They're not too terrible to tear apart and rebuild again, just reseal. They're a pretty easy transmission. Which then brings us back to the actual transmission in these. These transmissions are freaking indestructible. And I know some of you are probably going to contend with that, but I mean, I don't hardly see any failures with these transmissions. You might see the occasional get stuck in neutral with the gear shift lever, or maybe you ran out of lube or something because the axle seals were out or PTO seal was out and it's just pouring out somewhere and you ran it dry. That's about the only time you actually see a catastrophic failure, as if some sort of predetermined problem was there that could have been fixed that killed it. I mean, it's just like anything else on here. If you let something go too long and it kills it, it's kind of your fault. But most of the time, they won't break on their own accord. You have to cause something in order for it to break. So, like, if you got all your seals in it and you got good fluid, you're more than likely never going to break it. And these things are really robust when it comes to pulling tractors. They always use these rear ends in the pulling tractors out there with 5.9 Cumminses, John Deere engines. I mean, anything you can think of, it's probably been paired to with the transmission, and they just keep on kicking. Now, in this case, that's aimed more towards the large frame tractors, which 1750 and up is what I call large frame. If it has this type of pedal and higher for the brake pedal, I call it a large frame. That's just a good indicator. That's not exactly what determines that, but you get the point. Now, 1650 and 1550, those guys might have a little bit more trouble if you were to stick a Cummins in them or something like that. That's a little higher horsepower. You might have a little bit higher probability of it breaking some gears or whatever else have you, but still, regardless, they are a kick-ass transmission. Pretty robust as you're going to get. Up next is hydraulics, and this is kind of where we fall off from being a really reliable and me being a fanboy and, you know, parading it and calling it a really good, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I'll give it to everybody else out there. The hydraulic systems on the 50 series and under are kind of shit. Oliver did pioneer the hydroelectric system, which was a pretty ingenious idea of electronic solenoids controlling a magnet on a hydraulic cylinder, so you could have a preset depth every time, and it will hold the lever after you've pushed it and let go of it, and then it releases it once the magnet touches. I mean, there's a whole nother, I can explain that in another video if need be, but it's a really cool system. The only problem is they never are intact. If you have a tractor with an intact wiring harness and it functions, you need to take care of that thing ASAP. That thing is rare as all get out. Working hydroelectrics are almost impossible to find. This one has remnants of it still intact, like the switches and some solenoids inside the hydraulic housing. The actual hydraulic pumps themselves are iffy, and since this is an open center system, it's kind of primitive in the first place, but they're not a bad system when the pumps all together and the seals are good and all whatever else have you. Everything's in working order, basically. But the pumps themselves sometimes can get a hairline crack right in the middle of the center casting, and next thing you know, you just lost all your pressure and you're pissing oil everywhere inside your pan. The pans themselves can go out and drain fluid down into your rear end. Now you got an overfilled rear end and a dry hydraulic system. Not a win-win there either. Rock shafts on these 3-points are not terrible, but I'm definitely not a big fan of them because almost every tractor I've ever been around that's had a 3-point like this, or even a Category 1 3-point that's built into the machine, they're usually pretty prone to failing and just old seals, and they just kind of go by the wayside. Next thing you know, your 3-point's falling on you and you don't even realize it. Like, for example, I can crank this thing up. I have to rev it up to 1200 RPM just because how weak the pump is. Pick the 3-point all the way up with nothing on it. I can shut the tractor off or even idle it down all the way, and it'll slowly go back down over about a course of about 10 minutes before it's down to full max out on the bottom. PTOs in this tractor, you get a 540 and 1000 RPM PTO. This one's a standard 540 single speed, shocker. These are pretty robust PTOs. The gearing inside of them, I've taken it apart, is absolutely kick-ass. They are just tough as nails. The weak point on these, however, is going to be your clutch packs and your linkage. This is a nice prime example of a highly worn PTO linkage. So, as you can see, pay attention to this guy right here. He's not moving, but my PTO arm is moving quite a bit. So pins in these are kind of worn out. I just need to rebuild them and shim it up. That's actually pretty easily taken care of. But the main part, the main kicker of this, however, is that the clutches in these, once you slip them or they get warped or they just get tired in general, it's pretty much game over. You got to tear apart. You got to pull the main shaft from PTO to your clutch or flywheel, pull it out. You got to drop the PTO system out. You got to change the clutch packs. That's a whole semi-nightmare. They're not terrible. Everything on these tractors is actually pretty easy to fix, but if you're going to fix something difficult, the rear end or the PTO is probably going to be your most difficult, and then the hydraulics will be your most finicky. So other than that, everything else is pretty straightforward, honestly, for repairs. I guess I can go ahead and cover ergonomics here while I'm at it. This is pretty much your basic row crop tractor. You got a step, 2 handles, up you go, and on the platform you are. Now we're speaking Star Wars. One downside now that strikes me right now is that you will have rust down there that gathers with your fender mounts there. Dirt gets in the top there, gets all settled down and brustled in between the bolts there on that entire mounting flange, and next thing you know, those are rotted out to the point where they're just gone. These are nice and stiff still. Well, we swapped them out, actually. This is not the original set. The original set actually had that problem. And this mighty toe back here actually suffers from this dilemma. You can't see it from the outside, but if you go and shake it, it's pretty well rotten out. I think this one's worse. No, he's actually stiff. He's just missing screws. So I take that back. The fenders on this one are actually not in as bad a shape as I thought. But we have the original fenders from the 1850 up there, and you can actually visibly see rust on the outside right over there. So these are pretty bad rotten out. Pretty much any flat top fender on any Oliver tractor, though, will have that problem. Whether it's on a 770 or a 2150, you're going to have it. So, well. Of course, the seats on these aren't exactly the most durable things on the planet. But at the same time, they'll get you where you need to go. And these are actually quite comfy, honestly. If this seat was intact like it was about 10 years ago, this would have been a very comfy seat. You can adjust it up and down with the shock absorber, which is on the back side there. And then down here, you have your seat adjustment for forward and back. All your controls are pretty well placed. Your clutch pedal I can get to pretty fine. Brakes, you can independently choose them or flip the lock on top there for both. Hydropower drives right here. Throttles here. All your basic cluster controls are all right here. Easy reach. Steering wheel's pretty easy to get to. You have tilt steering wheel in 3 positions, if it'll go up for me. This one's worn out, so don't take that with a grain of salt, but it still works decently. It's just worn out, like the shaft in their slides. And then this also is telescoping. You take the center and spin it loose. Voila. I now have a steering wheel that's in my face. All your other controls are over here. Sometimes you might have your PTO lever on the left side if it was custom ordered that way. More than likely it won't be, however. You have both remotes here. You have your rock shaft or your 3-point here. On this side, you don't have any controls, but like I said, you might have the PTO on the other side. That was optional. Gear shift is down here for your 6-speed transmission with 2 reverse. H pattern. So if you're ever confused on this, it is quite literally how the decal is. I'm not really going to go into depth on that one because it's pretty straightforward. You have 2 neutrals, top and bottom, and then you got a set of gears in each neutral. Voila, there it is. Early style has a battery box cover right underneath there. Easy to get to. The battery boxes, ooh, that's a good point I almost missed. Battery boxes right down there. That's the cover for them, but this one doesn't have it on it. The battery boxes on these love to rust out and absolutely just dump your batteries. They won't let go of them, but you're definitely going to catch dirt and grime in there, and it's just going to rot out. So definitely be prepared to look down in there and don't hesitate to. Brakes on these tractors are okay, especially if they're adjusted up. They're actually pretty nice. They are non-assisted dry disc brakes, and you actually see the housing right there for them. And they're both differential brakes, so you have one on each side that control. Actually, they're not differential brakes now that I think about it. I think they're linked up into the axles coming out of the differential. So you have an independent brake for each tire. Sheet metal. These things can be kind of iffy on the sheet metal department. In a really nice way, honestly, just a good tip straight out of the gate. There's 2 wear points you can look on these to see if the tractor's been well kept or not. Besides paint and the obvious, there's 2 nice wear points to cheat your way to figure out whether or not the tractor is in good shape. That guy right there. There's supposed to be an actual piece of steel here that finishes this elbow that you can bolt into there. Now, obviously, ours is all sorts of broken because we had a shed fall on it in 2011 from a tornado. So, yeah, she's a little bunged up. But if it's just a regular Rockoff tractor with no problems, you'll have this little corner piece right here, no problems. Obviously, look around the exhaust, make sure there's no dents or dings of something falling over on it. Same goes for back here. If you got a piece back here that's in good shape, it's been well taken care of. And then the second wear point that I was talking about is just obviously your pedals and your gear shifter. Just feel your linkages. If they're loose, it's probably high hour and the tachometer has been lying to you. Or somebody's just beat the shit out of it, whichever comes first. And of course your pedals. If it's not been repainted, your pedals will definitely be a good wear point for you. A little bit on the hydraulic housing, which I don't even really know how I got that there, but, you know, foot plates, you'll see nice little cavitation, divots, wear spot on the paint, etc., just stuff like that. So all in all, these tractors are a really nice tractor. If you can find them for cheap and you can pretty much tell yourself that it's a good tractor just from what you've seen, I'd honestly go for it and bite the bullet. If I had more room, I'd have quite a few more to do more chores around here, but we have a utility tractor sitting in that shed over there already, and these are just kind of here if we want to farm with them. So, yeah, Whoops. But anyways, if you guys thought I covered everything and you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more. I definitely got more content coming like this. Don't hesitate to suggest ideas on what you want me to cover. I'll probably cover them too here later. I don't have enough time to do them right now. I'll probably just do this one and another video later. But thanks for watching. Catch you guys on the next one. If the guy pulls out the tractor and it's doing this with a shed, you probably shouldn't buy it. Just as a heads up.